The world is complex, the Bible is complex. Human existence is a tangled ball of experience, perception, and understanding. Ravel is a puzzling word, denoting both a tangling and untangling. This podcast attempts to hold honest conversations in good faith. Some ideas expressed in this podcast will be challenging. Others will be obvious. When a PhD in biblical interpretation and a habitually podcasting man-child discuss matters of society, scripture, and scandal, you get Ravel.
Hey everybody, you are listening to Ravel, and it's me, your best buddy Basil, and with me, as always, the freewheeling, sunscreen-wearing, transformational event himself, Dr. Christopher Ryan Gates. What's up, buddy?
Gosh. What's up, buddy? I feel like this is maybe the first time you've given a description of me that probably better suits you.
You are a transformational event, Chris, and we all know it. Well, we've got an awesome talk for you today. In fact, we're probably going to just jump right into it. But Christopher, I mentioned recently that part of our reason for being a little tardy on some episodes, missed a couple weeks, was because I returned, post-pandemic, to one of my sort of recurring projects, which is some boots on the ground, transformational event research and experience at Burning Man. Now look, folks, I get it. You're wondering, why? Why? Just why? Would there no more explanation needed? Why would Basil do this? Why would a Christian be interested in what's happening at Burning Man? What is a transformational event? Does Basil now have some sort of demon, or does is he now some sort of psychedelic shaman, and that we have let a fox in the hen house? All relevant questions, and that's why I thought it would be important and relevant to bring in the man himself, who has done probably more work from a Christian perspective on transformational events, their place in the world, the effect on society, and why Christians should care. And we'll introduce him in just a moment. But Chris, how are you feeling? What's your anxiety levels right now?
Not much. I might not be one of those ones who would question why you would be out there in a Bohemian Grove type setting, running around with powerful and influential people, because I myself, spent a lot of time in my teenage years, dabbling in a lot of weird kind of, occulty sort of realms and things like that. At least
you were a teenage psychedelic warrior.
Yeah, not practicing, but definitely, poking my nose around in those sorts of things. So I am quite aware of the importance of these types of events and how they come to bear on the world all around us, whether or not we know these things are happening or not. So I'm not anxious, but I'm looking forward to perhaps giving some of our listeners out there maybe a first kind of look at what this is, and maybe some of them don't even know when we say Burning Man what that even is. They might not be judging you yet because they don't even know what you've been involved in. That's
possible. That would be, I will say, probably a minority at this point. Burning Man being such a famous or infamous transformational event, but I will say, much like many topics, people have a first impression. They have the impression that has been given to them either by sort of interactions with secular society, or perhaps even from the pulpit. So we hope, again, as we do, to have some tough conversations in good faith to explore. I mean, this is right down the alley as far as society, scripture, and scandal.
Yeah.
And so I can't wait to talk about it. And here to talk about it with us is Mr. or Miss Doctor, I don't know actually, we'll have to ask, but Carl Teichrib, who's a researcher, a writer, and a lecturer focusing on the paradigm shift sweeping the Western world, including the challenges and opportunities faced by Christians. Over the years, he has attended a range of internationally significant political, religious, and social events in his quest to understand the historical and contemporary forces of transformation, including the Parliament of World Religions, Burning Man, and the United Nations Millennium Forum. Mr. Carl Teichrib, give us just a brief about who you are and what this, focus, this research focus actually means.
Oh, sure. Absolutely, Basil. And thank you for having me on. I've been engaged in researching and writing on global transformation from a Christian point of view since the mid-1990s. The research side actually goes before that, pardon me, a little bit, but mostly it's been a work that has been full-time since 1997. And I in the past, I was the director of research for a Christian author in the U.S., and my focus has really been a dovetail of sorts between culture, politics, interfaithism, transhumanism. So there's been a kind of a, you could look at it as a, oh, pardon me, I'm sorry for the cough all of a sudden. You could look at it as a ministry where I'm standing at the crossroads, that intersection of where global change takes place, and have been observing, analyzing, and documenting it now for, oh golly, a long period of time, coming on close.
I mean, you started in years. You started in the 1900s, so at least 100 years. That's crazy.
But, along the way, I've published a lot of articles. I've given a lot of lectures. I've done a fair amount of interviews. I teach a modular course on secular and pagan trends at Miller College of the Bible. That happens once a year. It's a lot of fun. And in terms of the political side, yes, I've examined international relations and global governance. I've attended many World Federalist and global governance events going all the way back to 1997. On the interfaith side, Parliament of World Religions, I was at the charter signing of the United Religions Initiative back in the year 2000. The G7, G8 World Religions Summit that took place back in 2010. In terms of other religious trends that I monitor, I really kind of take a poke at what's happening within the world of paganism, including Wicca and witchcraft. So I've attended a number of witchcraft events. I've been to ceremonies. I've interacted quite a bit within the Wiccan community. Transhumanism, I was one of the first. I'm not the first, I know that, but I was one of the early Christian critics of transhumanism, having attended different transhumanist events in person. In fact, back in, golly, I got to think here, 2013, I was invited by the Mormon Transhumanist Association to give a Christian criticism of their worldview. And you can find that on the Mormon Transhumanist webpage, or their YouTube page, pardon me. And then, as somebody engaged in trying to understand global transformation and its impact on the Christian world, by somewhere around 2008 or so, I was really wrestling with, there must be a cultural angle to this. There must be a cultural interpretation or a cultural expression besides just popular culture. I mean, popular culture is one thing, but there's got to be something bigger, something more driving. And I had already known about Burning Man since about the year 2000, but I hadn't really taken it seriously. I put it in my back pocket. And then by the year 2008 or so, like I said, I started to really ask questions around what does global culture look like? What does this culture of oneness look like? So I dived into it, and Burning Man was just simply one expression of what is really a global movement, a global phenomena that has both social, spiritual, and cultural implications to it. And I dived into it significantly. In fact, the subtitle of my book is, as you mentioned, The Temple of Man and the Age of Re-Enchantment. That subtitle really was birthed out of what I was anticipating and then what I saw at the 2017 burn when they placed the man in his own temple. And indeed, it was a very, very fitting experience and even a symbol for what my subtitle of my book would portray, that we put ourselves in that temple and we are re-enchanting ourselves. Listen, secularism is nothing more than really an intermediary stage between when one religion is on its way out, one dominant ethic moral system is on its way out, and some new one or a resurrecting of an old one is on its way back in. And so that when I give my course on secular trends, I always tell my students up front, the very, very first class, the trend in secularism is spirituality. That's where we're moving to. That is the age we're living in. Atheism, yes, we have our vocal atheist community, but when it comes right down to it, there's much more interest in spirituality than there is in just hardcore humanism or atheism.
This idea of the trend in secularism, I mean, I don't, maybe you've described it that way to me before, secularism being sort of a transitional period between two ethic systems or two religions even. I'm at least rediscovering that concept, and it makes a lot of sense because we've seen recently, and I don't know if we've covered it here, but I've covered it on other pieces of my work. There's a really ambitious motivation within the sort of sphere of thought leaders, secular thought leaders, to recreate the benefits of religion while simultaneously sort of ditching the tradition part or the historical relevance to create a new spirituality kind of out of nothing. And I kind of see this as, or I felt that this is a reaction to things like Christian apologetics. You know, there's parts of Christian apologetics that are based in, you know, if there's an existence of morality, if every, you know, kind of a C.S. Lewis type of mere Christianity argument, where the very existence of a moral instinct pushes us towards the existence of God, and of course a lot of those arguments was towards Christianity in particular. But it seems nowadays we're really seeing a spiritual secularism, even towards the description, which is kind of dated now, a description of oneself as being not religious but spiritual, which sort of implies, you know, superstitious thought, but without the chains of organized religion or whatever. And a lot of that, I mean, it's just interesting to conceive of how secularism, which is broadly, a lot of people would consider it or akin to atheism, when in reality, it really is a spiritual movement, this secularism.
Right. You know, something I would like to bring into play is a bit of a timeline, and these are large, broad epochs that I'm speaking of when I bring forward this concept. Re-enchantment, or you could call it maybe a new form of paganization, is a pushback against both modernity and also postmodernism. So we had the era of Christendom up to roughly the 17th century. And when I'm saying Christendom, I'm meaning that in its more broad term. Christendom became, the ethos, it was the morality, the church, whether it was the Roman Catholic Church or then during the Reformation, there was this complete social, ethical, moral understanding that the Christian perspective or the church position had a dominant role to play within the realm of culture, within the realm of society. That was
sort of a synonymous, sort of universally accepted as synonymous with ultimate reality.
Exactly. And then in roughly the 17th century up until, and this is where things get really kind of fuzzy in terms of the timeline. Some people argue the 1940s, some people argue different time frames, but I argue up until the 1960s, you had the era of modernity, where naturalism, science in quotation marks, or scientism, positivism, naturalism, the Enlightenment era, where man's rationale became the dominant intellectual pursuit. Man was a rational animal. We did not have a need for God. We were now poking intellectually into areas where we said man is all there is. Man is the measure of all things. And it was an age of reason, an age of enlightenment. And you could argue there was, romanticism in there, the whole bit. Nevertheless, you had this period of modernity where it was industrialization. It was the power of what man could do, his might. World War I throws that onto the battlefield. World War II throws it into the battlefield in an even larger way. And you could say that the final symbol of the age of modernity was the atomic mushroom cloud. Or you could say another example was in the 1960s with the last helicopter leaving Saigon during the exodus of America's influence within Vietnam. In fact, I argue that specifically in the book. And what that was at that point, there was a breakdown, and this is why the Vietnam era was very important. First for France, because they wrecked themselves there first, and then America. And what Vietnam did was it broke down our sense of authority, trust in institutions, trust in science, trust in industry, trust in our politicians. And all of a sudden, a completely new era was opened up. And that was the beginning point of, you could really say, postmodernity. Yeah, there's the arguments, all kinds of ways back and forth in terms of changes in art and literature. But in terms of the culture, there was a breakdown. We no longer looked for authority figures. We no longer looked to see what was ultimate, what was true, what was grounded in tradition, or in faith, or even in fact. We went internal, looking at feelings. And so postmodernism ends up really asking lots of questions, but not even allowing us to find answers. We are stuck in the great pause, where we're not really sure what is real or what is true. And we now search for that within personal identities, within cultural targets and norms and all kinds of other stuff. How I see myself.
Yeah. And it's around that time that you're talking about, kind of the mid 20th century, where we got some of the I guess the seeds of the postmodern absurdism, the sort of loss of reason as sort of a binding principle in the experience of human beings. You got Albert Camus around that time, Immanuel Kant, Soren Kierkegaard was much earlier, but people really started paying attention to Kierkegaard in the mid 20th century, and it was just like the perfect timing when man's reason had led us to like a type of apocalypse with the two world wars and then Vietnam, and people were there's a movement in the direction of like, okay, we're coming out of a very dark period, and let's all just kind of get into absurdism and postmodernism and stuff like that.
And this, of course, is where the counterculture kicks in the 1960s, as there is this pushback against tradition, against norms, against what family meant, against what government meant, against what it even means to be in community. We had a radical shift, a radical change. The 1960s is far more important than people realize, which is really interesting because Burning Man, and we'll be talking about that soon, is a spin-off of the counterculture. It really is a spin-off of the 1960s counterculture, both the counterculture that we saw that happened, of course, with the era of the hippies and all of that, but also the technological counterculture, the rise of Silicon Valley, because the two of them, interestingly, do go hand in hand. And so in the 1960s, you really could argue this is the beginning stage of postmodernism, but at the same time, because postmodernism is really a void of meaning and purpose, at the same time, there is this search for meaning and purpose. And that is where the concept of re-enchantment kicks in. And so re-enchantment is this search for wonder, this search for something that is secular yet spiritual, yet very dynamic in terms of my experience. And so it is an era with the counterculture where you had the introduction of Eastern mysticism. You had new thought in terms of esoteric philosophy. All of a sudden, that all becomes more mainstream. There is a changeover, certainly a very dominant changeover. And so that brings us to today. And what are we right now? Well, we are postmodern, absolutely, but we're also re-enchanted. We're now seeing spirituality arise. Interest in things that are spiritual has become far more prevalent, and not just in terms of what you may be thinking with yoga or with, the latest fads, but also the rise of paganism and even paganism within politics. So I'll give you a quick one, just flash example of re-enchantment at the 1992 Rio Earth Summit. And by the way, this year is the 30th anniversary of the Rio Earth Summit, which gave us the climate change agenda, gave us all kinds of interesting frameworks for how to internationalize the green movement. So this is the United Nations Secretary General reminding government leaders at the close of the Rio Conference, the Rio Earth Summit, about their new political commitments. But it wasn't just a political commitment. And no, in fact, he was offering a spiritual commitment. Listen to what he had to say. I should like to conclude by saying that the spirit of Rio must create a new form of good citizenship. After loving his neighbor as the Bible required him to, post-Rio man must also love the world, including the flowers, birds, and trees, every part of that natural environment that we are constantly destroying. Over and above the moral contract with God, over and above the social contract concluded with men, we must now conclude an ethical and political contract with nature, with this earth to which we owe our very existence and which gives us life. To the ancients, the Nile was a god to be venerated, as was the Rhine an infinite source of European myths, or the Amazonian forest, the mother of forests. Throughout the world, nature was the abode of the divinities that gave the forest, the desert, or the mountains a personality which commanded worship and respect. The earth had a soul. To find that soul again, to give it new life, that is the essence of Rio. I'm sorry, that is classic pagan. And so what re-enchantment does is it marries the future with the past. You could call it an ancient future mythos.
I like it. Ancient future mythos. You really can feel a value on that in the secular culture. It's over the past few years, we've kind of noticed a movement away from atheism as like the cool thing to do or be in this, in celebrity culture, in mainstream culture as a whole. It's become cool again to be spiritual or to see things in spiritual ways, not necessarily what they would call, organized religious ways. But you can really see this draw towards enchantment or re-enchantment, as you say. And what your quote and indeed your work really points to is that, this isn't necessarily simply an organic movement. there is some top-down, or at least some conscious, intentional, methodical strategies at play here.
I have watched that, Basil, firsthand, which
Yeah.
is the importance of boots on the ground. One more example, if I may, which I think might resonate with your audience to some extent. In the 1990s, the Esalen Institute, and the Esalen Institute was kind of the engine of the counterculture of the 1960s, and still remains a very relevant organization and institute today. But in the 1990s, in one of their catalogs, I believe it was the 1993 catalog, this is one of their workshops, and the workshop was entitled Machine Dreams and Techno-Shamanism.
Mm.
Now take a listen, because this is re-enchantment. This is the connection of counterculture with psychedelics, with technology, with a new sense of spirituality. Is information immortal? What unexplored realms of spirit will we encounter with amazing new forms of computer and electronic hypermedia? New myths will be needed. New mysteries will be encountered. How can ancient models of mind such as shamanism, Hinduism, or voodoo help us comprehend silicon-based consciousness? Why are neuroenhancers crucial tools for so many computer innovators? Can humans share an erotic relationship with a machine being? Are earth spirits at play in fields of photons and electronic spin? A neo-psychedelic subculture is co-evolving with new technologies to reveal glimpses of exotic futures. And I could give you example after example after example, demonstrating that there has been, at least in the realm of that class of people that exert a certain amount of influence, a very tangible interest in things that are spiritual. So much so that it is the intertwining of things that we would consider to be secular, such as technology, within now a spiritual matrix.
Yeah, I'm wondering. I'm listening here, Carl. I'm not nearly as familiar with your body of work as Basil, as though I've heard you several times. And again, I'm briefly aware of this discussion altogether. But one of the things that keeps on crossing my mind here as I'm listening to you is we have in the Christian community, and we have kind of delved into these waters here already. But I think that there's the idea that people think you're either a believer or an atheist. And as you have been talking about, there is this kind of resurgence, and it has kind of been there, I think, all along, where people will reject the one true God, but still try and embrace some sort of spirituality that is not necessarily Luciferian or satanic or something like that. And I'm wondering, and you might be going here with this, but as you see people reaching out for this thing, which is I guess, as we as believers would call some kind of falsification of what the actual spiritual reality is in our deity. What sorts of parallels do you see with this kind of, spirituality that people are having with Christianity? So, like the desire, perhaps as people like to call it, the God-shaped hole that's in everybody's heart. That they're trying to fill. How close are some of these things perhaps coming, or what are some of the ways that you see this being a really good falsification of the authentic experience?
I'm glad you used that word experience, because so much that drives this becomes your personal experience. It is an experiential based movement. It's an experientially based sense of spirituality. So it's not interested in dogma. It's not interested in theology. It's not interested in even philosophical wrestlings. But it is certainly interested in what you feel, what you sense, what you've experienced, and that becomes a very powerful factor in grounding yourself within this concept of re-enchantment. And what's interesting, though, as I'm seeing a parallel within Christendom that I find troubling, is that we also now find ourselves easily drawn into areas of experiential spirituality where, because I felt it, that must be God. That must be God moving.
Hmm.
I think there's a danger in that. I think there's a grave danger. I'm not against experiences. I'm not against feelings. My goodness, we all have them. The danger for us as Christian lies in that we now put onto the Holy Spirit something that is not of him necessarily. So here's one thing that's kind of interesting when you're talking about, let's say, Burning Man or transformational culture or so many of these other experiences. There is a sense of, you have a feeling, and there is a tangible feeling, especially in a group context. It's called communitas. Communitas is this energetic, ecstatic sense of communion with each other, and you all feel like you're tapped in, you're one. You can get that sense of it going to a football game. There is a neuroscience to it called, and the terminology that goes with it is called flow. You've entered a flow state. I used to do a lot of pretty hardcore sport biking, and all of a sudden you just clicked, and you'd carve the perfect, you'd turn the perfect corner, you'd carve the perfect angle, you'd hit the apex just right, and everything just came together, and you're like, oh, man, I was in the zone. And that's how we describe it, as the zone. But that same feeling, those same neurochemical cocktails that are rushing through your system, dopamine, endorphins, serotonin, adrenaline, all that all of a sudden gives you that feeling, that sense that, oh, I'm tapped in, I'm touching it, something bigger than myself. Our danger within the Christian realm is when that happens to us. Let's say at a church service, we say, God had to have been here, or I felt the Holy Spirit's presence. Maybe you did. Maybe we were walking on some thin ice and attributing something to the Holy Spirit that isn't of him. But I see a same kind of pattern, and that pattern being, I will now gauge truth based on the experience that I just have. And that's where things get a little bit wonky sometimes.
Yeah. The flip side of that, if I could present, how someone might respond, especially because I was brought up in sort of the Pentecostal charismatic culture, which is very experiential and certainly has suffered some of the downsides of what you're saying. But coming from, someone in the secular side, or coming up in the secular side, or having transitioned maybe once or twice through different spiritual or religious experiments in life, I suppose, there is also an interesting contention with this idea of experience, because people, maybe they go to church, they grow up Christian, they learn the lessons, maybe they teach the lessons, maybe they're as involved in, I'm going to say, the little C church as much as they possibly can. But it is not strictly, but it includes a lack of that experiential nature that causes them to seek out the experiential nature. As a human, you experience the world. That is one visceral aspect of how we find out what is true or not. You could boil that down to, don't touch the stove, it's hot. And then, of course, we touch the stove because we need to experience the truth or whatever, just sort of to infantilize the point. And so you can also see how this perhaps lack of experience or discount of experience within a Christian setting could encourage exploration, experimentation with other quote-unquote spiritual or religious experiences that are precisely that, experience. Oh, I actually feel something. I spent my years in Sunday school, spent my years in church, did not have what I would call, not I, but the example person here, did not have an experiential moment where that backs up what I had been taught for so many years, and then something else does give them an experience, which of course is sort of the beginning of a breadcrumb trail that could lead them any number of places. In the Pentecostal charismatic tradition that I grew up in, there was a lot of value put on the experience. Now, of course, there's testing of spirits, and there's, there is always the temptation to rely on experience over, sound theology or scriptural, evidence or something. That temptation is always there, but if you're being responsible, you are testing the spirits. You are testing it against scripture. You are testing your experience, against really what's a few millennia of Christian history. And so I'm rambling a bit now, but just the other side of the coin of the dangers of experience, I feel like there is a danger in lack of experience as well, which could lure one to any one of these social movements you're talking about.
Well, and you make a really good point with that, Basil. So for an example, one of the individuals who I have rubbed shoulders with at Wiccan and witchcraft events is now a very well-respected witch. He's an author, but in his past, he was a youth leader. And by the way, there's a lot of former Christians within paganism, and I mean a lot. He was a former youth leader, and the dryness that he experienced, or the dryness that he encountered in his church, was one of the reasons why he left the church in pursuit of other spiritual forms that was ecstatic, that was experiential. And he was like, how can you guys make, as Christians, how can you guys make the resurrection of a dead guy, Jesus, boring? And he has a point. Absolutely, we've done that. And so there is, and I appreciated how you're bringing that balance in. We have to balance it out against Scripture. We have to balance it out against what is true. We have to balance it out. But we have to do that, it's called discernment. We need to be able to do that with all of our interactions as Christians. But there's both sides of that coin. And I think as we go into this conversation, one of the areas that kind of is important to the discussion about experience is that, and I know, Basil, you've had this, you've seen this firsthand at Burning Man. The experience of Burning Man is what creates that form of transformation that people have. It is an encounter that forces them psychologically and spiritually to look at something through a new lens. And so the experiential side is important to understand, both in terms of its dangers, but also in terms of what you had just described, where we as Christians have a lack of it, or we have placed it in the wrong way, either degrading it. Like I said earlier, I'm not against experiences or feelings, but at the same time, we have to be very careful of how that plays out.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed. I think we can all agree on that.
The other side, though, real quickly, for back to Chris's question, this is where I see us as Christians having to wrestle with the new spirituality. I think it forces us to recognize that we're living in a Romans 1 world. And by Romans 1, I mean we are seeing a movement that says we worship creation, not the Creator. And so our sense of spirituality is hinging on that. We now find ourselves in a similar situation, and I think we're just on the edges of it, to what the early church encountered. But the early church was stepping out of paganism, out of a pagan culture. We now are finding ourselves as a Christian church watching our culture step back into it. And so I think we need to be able to go back to God's Word. Romans 1 is a great example. Acts 17 is another good example. There are numerous places in Scripture where you can go back to and go, okay, this gives us a model, a bit of a context for now how we interact with the culture around us.
And I think that's a good opportunity to dial in a little bit more on Burning Man itself as an event. And I'm curious, Chris. Now, I know you're a very cool guy who's done lots of thinking and experienced a lot of the sort of the root opportunities that are available at Burning Man to those with a discerning palate. But I would like to start with maybe hearing a little bit, Chris, about your impression of Burning Man. What do you just talk a little bit about it, because I think it's a good jumping off point. I want to be clear. This is not me trying to invite you to be wrong, Chris. This is not me. This is not me trying to get you to say anything in particular. But I think that's one of the things I always come back, and I always kind of forget it. But then when I do the trip and come back, I'm kind of reminded that Burning Man both is everything that everybody thinks it is, but is also so much more. So would you mind kind of giving us a rundown of your impression of Burning Man first?
Yeah. I appreciate that you're not trying to set me up to be wrong. And I'm not the fall guy here.
Yeah, I'm just trying to give the listeners someone to relate to before we get into it.
Yeah, you play that role from time to time yourself, so I certainly am happy to do it in this.
Can we just get this guy to be relatable for a second, guys? Come on. Up in his ivory tower and his degrees.
Yeah, no, it was interesting hearing Carl talk about that kind of communal sort of experience, and the one that you had said you could have at kind of sporting events. I have experienced that myself, at kind of rock concerts and those sorts of things. And it is actually, I was listening to Jordan Peterson interview he did on Joe Rogan, and he was talking about that same sort of experience that you were describing, where everyone is at this concert and they're all kind of vibing with the music, right? They're all in the zone, like you were saying. And you start to realize, you look around and you're like, this guy right next to me is in the zone with me, and this other guy's they're in the zone. And then you realize you're in the midst of 10, 20, 30, 100,000 people who are all in the zone. And there is this kind of community experience that's going on, and that can be kind of encapsulated in a rock concert that takes place for, an hour, or in some kind of festival like Woodstock or something like that. And it has kind of been my impression that at Burning Man, it's kind of a combination of those sorts of things, and even more than at an event like Woodstock, where everybody's pretty much just there for the music and maybe for some illicit drugs. That at Burning Man, there is this sort of, however unspoken or maybe overt idea that people are seeking out enlightenment. So I have perceived it to be, a transformational event, although I might not have used that particular term until recently here, where people are going as kind of, an experience that they might kind of gain new perception or perspective through. And then, of course, I've also become aware of, the other sorts of more corporate angles, I suppose, if you will. But I guess it seems to me like this very strange hybrid of a bunch of hippies and a bunch of very well organized and methodical people coming together in order to, however intentionally or passively, enact an agenda within the minds of people. So that's about it. What that specifically looks like, Mad Max mostly are the images I get of, people in the desert dressed with goggles and leather chaps maybe, and then all kinds of various other fairies and things from the pictures that I've seen. So, that's about it. I'm happy to be educated.
Well, I'm happy to tell you that you're not wrong.
I'm probably not entirely right either, but I'll take not wrong to start.
The way that I've described it ever since the first time I went out there was that there's not no naked hippies. Not as many naked hippies as you'd expect, but definitely not no naked hippies. So that is definitely a part of it. But it's there's so much more. So Carl, can you give us? I mean, I don't know if I want to get so granular in the sort of history of the thing, but I am interested in how you present Burning Man rather than or besides an opportunity for naked hippies to run around without fear of arrest.
Well, first of all, Basil, are there really naked hippies? I mean, I haven't actually met any hippies. I've met a lot of people who dress up, but I haven't actually met any hippies. In fact, I passed by, this is in 2017, some camp. They had set up some couches on the Esplanade, and they held up some signs asking, "Where's the hippies?" or something to that effect. And I stopped my bike and I was yelling back at them, "I'm looking for the hippies too," or something along those lines. And we ended up having a fun conversation. But I mean, that's the language we are using. But really, it's okay.
Really good point.
Yeah. Who are these people really? Are they hippies? No, actually, they're your neighbors. They're maybe your grandchildren. There may be your spouse,
your doctor.
Your doctor, exactly.
Yeah.
They're school teachers. They're just regular people. I think the medium age is, I'm not sure what it is right now, but I know it used to be 34. But I understand it gets a little bit older every year.
It's yeah. So
it's also not a young person's event then, because
no, it's not.
This isn't Coachella or something like that. This is different yet than a music festival. Part of it is it's built by the participants. So the only thing that's provided, as you well know, is the street layout, the porta potties, the man, which is the massive human effigy that stands in the middle of this city that is built overnight out of nothing. I mean, it is a flat alkali desert, and then for the space of a handful of weeks, people converge, they build this city, then they open it up on Sunday for a full roughly 8 days. Everybody comes, and it is a participatory event. I think that's what makes it work almost more than anything else, is that people build it kind of in the reflection or in the image that they want to build it. So there's no prescribed agenda that way. It's a blank slate. And in that respect, it's really interesting because it offers like a petri dish into the culture of our day. And I think that's one of the important points of even going to Burning Man as a Christian. And I wouldn't suggest that everybody rushes off to Burning Man. Not at all. Not at all. But at the same time, it offers all of a sudden a glimpse into where our culture already is at.
I think one thing that's so. First of all, your comment about the hippies, absolutely. That's one of my big revelations when I started going there was, although it is a counterculture sort of experimental city, which it is absolutely as counterculture of an experience as I think one can have, and not just in the sort of surface level way in that like, oh, we can take drugs and blah, 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 or we can dress funny or not dress at all. Ooh, so counterculture. The very sort of culture, the very sort of philosophical foundation of Black Rock City is, anti-commoditization. There's no money. You can't spend anything. You are given things. It's the gift economy. You get, all of everything for free. You can just walk down the street. You get fed for free. You can get drink for free. Drugs are, and just so everybody knows, drugs are illegal. You are still on federal grounds, and there are law enforcement officers at Burning Man. You're really not supposed to do drugs out in the open, at least. So that's a little bit less counterculture than expected. But the counterculture aspect is much more than just like, we dress funny and we do weird stuff. It is really in sort of there's a spiritual core of the event that is trying to reimagine society for a short period of time. And you really do feel that. Now, along with that, it is sort of the assumption that all these people are, you know, in today's society and politics, things like that, you've got a lot of radical progressives who are pushing the boundaries of what it means to be, you know, what gender means, or what race means, or what, you know, sort of I don't know, a pinnacle of postmodernism and progressivism happening right now out in the world we're in now. I am always surprised to experience, honestly, just how conservative Burning Man can be. An example of that is even just things like the gender binary. You know, you're out here, you're on Twitter or whatever, and you call someone, you misgender someone, and you've committed some sort of mortal sin. I would say over 90% of Burning Man is sometimes celebrating, sometimes worshiping, sometimes whatever, sort of working off of the paradigm of, you know, the divine masculine and the divine feminine and the binary of spiritual reality. There is very little, or I will at least say this year, very little attention paid to this idea of, you know, transgenderism. Very little, some might call it, I don't know, someone might call it sort of pandering. Someone might call it, you know, sensitivity, something like that. But you notice there is a very interesting core of conservatism, at least from what I can see, compared to what you might expect from Burning Man. Now, that being said, you got to remember, conservatives are simply defending the ideas of the liberals of the past. And I think that's reflected in Burning Man, especially because of its sort of aging, average age of attendance. And that really caught me by surprise. There are, in some ways, people don't feel, I don't know what it is. I don't want to attach any motivation that might not be there, but I found it fascinating given the current state of what, you know, you are and aren't allowed to say about gender just in regular society.
You know, that's a good point. I know there's a lot of polyamory at Burning Man, but that's I mean that's a different issue per se. One thing that's interesting about the argument that this is a counterculture is, and I'd like to say it's actually the opposite. It stems out of the counterculture. It has its roots philosophically, culturally, artistically, linking itself back into the 1960s. That's very amply demonstrated. But that's no longer counterculture. That is culture.
Good point.
I think counterculture today are Christians who are willing to stand firm on the foundation of the biblical worldview. I think the real countercultural movement will have to be Christians. And that's already happening. You know, going to Burning Man, in 2019, we were joined by a young man who came in later in the week. He wanted to be part of our team, and we have, as you know, Basil, we've got this camp set up called the Camp of the Unknown God, which is taken out of Acts 17, using that Athens model, where Paul goes into Athens and he sees a monument set up to the unknown God, and then he uses that as a launching pad to go into the gospel. And so we have this camp set up, and in 2019 we had a young man join us, a great guy, by the way, really good guy. But he came in late, and I didn't know who he really was. I hadn't had the time to vet him because, as you well know, this is not a place for everybody. And there was a few things I had to say to him, and right in the very beginning, when he first arrived, I pulled him aside and said, "Look, you have to know the difference between finding something offensive and being personally offended. If you can't distinguish that, if you can't figure that out, you're in trouble. So you have to know the difference between finding something offensive and being personally offended. It's not about you. Yes, there's lots of things here that will offend, you'll find offensive, but at the same time, you've got to be willing to see past it. Nudity. Yes, there's nudity. And Basil, you brought this up. I think we had a conversation back in 2018 on the Ply, and you made a comment, and I thought it was a really pertinent comment. There's more nudity than you're used to, but not as much as you expect.
Yeah.
And that's true. Very true. It's a very sexual place, very sensual. So I had to tell this individual, you've got to have that in check. You've got to recognize, yeah, okay, she's beautiful, she's hot. Recognize it, and then keep going. Don't dwell. Don't dwell on it. Gifting. It's a gifting economy. There is no commodification. There's no buying or selling. It's not even bartering. It's gifting. So can you accept the gift graciously? If it's something you like, fantastic. But if it's not, can you dispose of it quietly without making a scene? So those are some of the things that I had to explain to this gentleman. And it was good. It was a good reminder for myself and the rest of our team that, okay, we're here. We've stepped inside of their church. And by the way, that is how a lot of people view transformational culture. I've been to other events besides Burning Man. In fact, in 2017, I was doing surveys, worldview surveys on the ground at a Burning Man regional in Alberta, Canada. And I had lots of great conversations, tons of great conversations. And I was told flat out by one married couple, they were in their 40s, and they talked about how this movement was their church, period. So, you've stepped into that world, and now you recognize, all right, here are some of the rules of the game. You are playing for a different reason. You're there for a different reason. But it is a reflection of where culture is at right now. That is really, really, I think has become more evident in the last few years. Yeah.
And just to mention, as people sort of build an idea of what's going on there, it's also humongous. It's like between 2 and 3 miles wide in any direction. So when you talk about a festival or an event or something like that, you go to Coachella, oh, there's a half a dozen stages that you can go to, and you just got to walk and buy a funnel cake in between them. I've actually never been to Coachella, so nobody, don't worry, don't at me. But Burning Man, I mean, Black Rock City is the size of a small city. It is miles wide in any direction. And to get anywhere, you are walking or you are riding a bike in sand, basically, depending on the weather that year. And it's 100 degrees plus almost at all times. So, and because it is a city, it's not like there are attractions. There are attractions. There's art everywhere. There's art out in the middle of the desert. There's art in the streets. There are things to climb on. You're radical. What is it? Radical inclusion. You can kind of climb on anything you want. You can mostly. You can visit. Anywhere you want. But there are also things akin to restaurants, bars, public napping areas. It really is an interesting experience in an event. Not that there are planned events for you to go from place to place on a schedule, although you can certainly try. It is pretty much the hardest possible thing to do at Burning Man is keep some sort of schedule. But it is enormous. And that is another part of what makes it, I think, so powerful to people, is you almost can't escape it. You can run in any direction, and no matter where you are, you're in some sort of altered state of society.
And the sound is different.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there is a sound specific to Black Rock City. And when you go out to the deep playa, there's that muffled sound of 100 different sound camps all wafting over you. And then you go deeper into the city, and then that's where the individual sounds kind of all of a sudden are heard, the conversations, the criers on the street saying, hey, here, get whatever you want.
The hecklers.
Yeah.
Lots of hecklers.
Yes, exactly. Everything from get your grilled cheese sandwich to, you're wearing too much makeup to whatever. It's just everything under the sun. But you raise a good point when it comes to the schedule. When I'm there, I am trying to get to lots of workshops. I go to Camp Mystic, I go to Playa Alchemist, I go to all these different big camps where you have the movers and shakers of the world who are there either from the realm of cryptocurrency or they're part of some government agency. I mean, my goodness.
Science.
Lots.
Science. There. I spent some time speaking with somebody who was instrumental in the James Webb Telescope. So there's, NASA affiliated people. It's really any category that you can think of. There is someone there who is at the top of the industry, at the top of the field. They're usually giving a lecture, and you segued so wonderfully into this, Carl, is that, Burning Man is not just run around, have fun, experience something new. There is very intentional dissemination of culture, science, technology, things like that. So I'm sorry to interrupt. But
No, you're absolutely right. For myself as a researcher, I mean, that's kind of how I'm geared first and foremost. It's just like an absolute buffet table of information that you can glean from every which direction. Everything from, I've gone to workshops on Agenda 2030, to workshops on psychedelics and legalization of certain substances. And then the crazy thing is I watch it happen in my country, Canada, and it's happening from exactly the same people who I had just been in the workshops with at Burning Man. Crazy stuff.
Yeah. The shaman, the psychedelic shaman, I don't remember. I don't think we went to this together, but there was a psychedelic lecturer in 2018, I believe, the first year that I went. And turns out he was at Davos last year or this year, whatever the most recent Davos was, the World Economic Forum. He was at Davos with a psychedelic, tent teaching at Davos about how psychedelics were part of the, the new world order, global great reset thing. So the talks, the people, the things that are happening, they are not just for counterculture people to whatever, spend an afternoon listening to a lecture, but they disseminate into all aspects of society.
One of the workshops I attended in 2019 was a pre-party or a future party for the Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. We've made it to 2030. Now we're going to have a party. And the person leading that was one of the more influential young leaders within the World Economic Forum, and he was the one who was emceeing the event. But as that event unfolded, one of the kind of the vibes that came with it is Burning Man is the Davos of our generation. Burning Man is the Bohemian Grove of our generation. This is where the influencers go. This is our new space. And again, as that, the researcher side of me, I had the spidey senses going 110 miles an hour as they were laying out literally their insights, their vision into what culture and politics and social issues should look like. And so you're right. Everybody has a sense that this is just a great big party. In fact, the first time I was at Burning Man was 2017, and I magically received a text because I don't have a lot of signal out there. Nobody has a lot of signal out there. But I magically received this text way late at night from a person who had sent me a link to an article that had the headline to the effect of 70,000, and yes, there's 70,000 people out there. 70,000 naked people having an orgy in the desert or something to that effect. And I'm standing there looking around going, where?
Yeah.
I've just come out of workshops with world leaders in very specific fields of industry. And yes, there is an orgy dome, and yes, there is a very heightened sexuality to the place. But at the same time, it is that blend. It is that complete blend of the political, religious, cultural, artistic. It's all there. It is from that research point of view, as somebody engaging in Christian worldview issues, it is the crossroads.
You guys have done a wonderful job explaining for myself and anyone else who might want a snapshot of it, what's going on there. But I'm wondering if before we run out of time, Carl, if you could talk to us kind of specifically about what the heck you're doing there. So you kind of mentioned your camp there, which anybody familiar with their Bibles probably has a pretty good idea just from the name of it. But can you talk to us a little bit about why you're there, what's going on at your camp, that sort of thing? Why should a Christian be involved in this whatsoever?
Sure. Well, I'm there for two reasons. One, I'm there as a researcher. That's part of it because this is the work I do. But in terms of Christian outreach, this was something that Bob Worley and myself, we were wrestling with, and Bob Worley's been going to the burn since the mid 1990s. So he's seen it change dramatically. But Bob hadn't been inside the city for a long time. So in 2017, Bob and I were in discussion, going back and forth. What would this look like? How would this look to set up a Christian outreach inside of Burning Man? And so we came up with the title of the camp, called the Camp of the Unknown God, specifically as as something that would raise interest. It would be provocative. It would compel people to ask questions. And can we do outreach? Can we enter what is ostensibly a pagan world and engage with the gospel? And the answer is yes. It can be very intimidating at times. At the same time, we have had fantastic conversations around who Jesus Christ is, around the otherness of God. And this is important, Chris, as we as a camp like to use the model, and we've used it on a number of times. The difference between oneism and Dr. Peter Jones, who's a Christian author out of Escondido, California, the founder of Truth Exchanges, does a remarkable job of putting this model out. Oneism or oneness, that is the world's point of view that says God, man, and nature are all essentially the same. Their core is the same. And that's the Eastern worldview, that's the new spirituality, that's re-enchantment, that's paganism. My goodness, it's all of what we would see as non-biblical. The biblical point of view is not oneism, it's twoism, not dualism, twoism. That is, God is distinct and utterly unique compared to creation. There is an absolute distinction between the two. So there's God and everything else. And that's the model we end up using there. We've used it a lot. So, we'll have people in 2017, just to give you a good example, had a young man that walked by our camp and blurted out, "Who is this unknown God?" Well, hey, come on in, get underneath the shade. Here's some Gatorade, here's some food. Tell us about yourself. This gentleman, he was an esoteric artist from Russia. He was a oneist. That whole thing came out in the conversation. And then the conversation switches back to his question. Let's go back to your question. And we use that as an opportunity then to speak the biblical message, to communicate that biblical message. And in his case, it was directly oneism versus twoism. Interestingly, and I actually talk a little bit about that conversation in my book. At one point I mentioned to him, I said, "Okay, you're a oneist. Are you telling me that as an artist, your artwork has the same value as that you have as an artist?" He's like, "Well, of course not. No, I'm different than my art. That's obvious." And I said to him to the effect of, "Well, look around. I mean, the mountains are amazing here. The desert is amazing. The place is stark, but there's a beauty to it as well. God is the ultimate artist. Are you telling me that the artist in the art are the same. And he had this big smile that came across his face. He goes, "I see where you're going. And I have to rethink some things."
Yeah. So just in case anybody is not drawing the immediate corollary there, you're coming
please,
from
please, because I got so, you know what? Look, people, when you got problems with certain things, it definitely gives away how much you do or don't read your Bible. So illuminate us, Chris.
Well, just because you're coming from from Acts 17 there, Paul in Athens, which you had talked about. I think you kind of left it at that. I actually had the opportunity, while I have not been to Burning Man, I got to go to Mars Hill and stand up there. It still is there today. It is this little, kind of like a giant boulder, an outcropping of rocks that sits kind of just under the Parthenon. And it was a place where all of the thinkers, kind of the movers and the shakers, if you will, the people who were very influential in the culture in the first century, would go to sit, and they would go to think, and they would go to contemplate all these different gods. And they had shrines or statues there set up to all of these gods, all the gods that they knew. And there was a shrine there, and it said to the unknown God. And Paul uses this as an opportunity, rather than avoiding this place where all of this, crazy secular philosophical thought and influencing was going on. He went straight into that place and offered to these men who were sitting there and thinking, I see that you are so thorough here that you have shrines to all of these gods that you do know. And there's one right here for this God that you don't know. Let me tell you about that. And he used that as an opportunity to share the gospel. And when I first heard about your work that you were doing out there, and I think it was actually back in 2019, I just thought it was so brilliant. The angle that you guys were taking, I thought also incredibly brave. Like you said, there are times, I'm sure, when you're out there and it can maybe get a bit contentious. And the fact that you are kind of going into the lion's den, if you will, into enemy territory to a certain extent, and you guys are putting up a sign that basically says, find Jesus here, whether people know that's what they're finding or not. So I think that's really, really cool. Anybody who would be a critic of yours, I think, is foolish, and I would chide them for being a critic. I don't know if you get that from the Christian community, but I was wondering, you can talk about maybe the Christian reception of the ministry that you guys are doing out there, but I would also kind of like to know, you gave one example there, but overall, are you met with people being kind of contentious there? Are people generally pretty open? Do they see Jesus as one of many gods and many answers, or what is the general vibe out there? You guys have been talking about it with a lot of kind of generalities, which I know you kind of have to do because it's so big, but generally speaking, what is the reception out there for you guys?
For us, our camp every year has been different. In 2019, we had a camp from Europe that was right behind us. When they found out we were Christians, they wouldn't even look at us for the rest of the week. That was it. End of story. Which was wild because they had to walk through our camp every day to get to the street, and it was like, hi, and just totally ignored us when they found out we were Christians. And then at the same time, we've had conversations where we've had people return and even say, hey, can we come back? In fact, 2018, we had some younger people, young guys, they'd never been to Burning Man before. They actually moved into our camp to be with us, to have conversations all week long.
Wow. Have you seen any conversions out there? Have you had any real fruitful gospel conversations? Anybody fall on their knees and accept Jesus right there?
No.
I'm not trying to make light of it, but I'm just
we haven't had anything like that. But we've had thoughtful conversations, very thoughtful conversations. We've had people who have acknowledged they'd have to rethink some things, which is really big. That's the starting point. That's the seed, right?
Absolutely.
So that's there. That's important. We've also run into Christians who are there who don't know why they're there.
And
is
that where you met Basil?
So for an example, in 2018, one of our campmates was at the temple, and he saw this girl crying, because that's what happens at the temple. And there's a massive temple there. I mean, it's massive. And it's like a funeral for the full week. And here was this girl crying, and he approached her and asked questions, and it turned out she was actually a Christian. She goes to church. She believes Jesus Christ is the only way, the whole bit. But she had been struggling as an individual with her Christianity and with so many things in life. She'd just been struggling. And she really didn't know what to think anymore. She thought this would be the place to go. And so she went to Burning Man. I don't know if she was part of a camp or just camping solo, whatever, doesn't matter. But there she was. And yeah, one of our teammates spoke truth to her, spoke with her about Jesus Christ, ended up sitting and praying with her. Okay, so you have 80,000 people. Everything under the sun is happening, and people from every walk of life is there. Is going to Burning Man something every Christian should do? Not at all, not even close. But my goodness, walk into Athens. This is Athens. This is where the world is turning, and where there is spirituality, and every soul that's there. And this is one thing, Chris, I'll say, it bothers me a lot when I have Christians who are critical of us going, who use terminology like, "Oh, they're all going to hell anyways," or they're all pagans, they're all burning. This kind of stuff. I get that quite a bit, actually. People who are saying, "Why are you even bothering? It's a waste of time." Sorry, if that was the attitude, if that was the approach, the early church would have been dead in the first week.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It really is a pretty clear picture of kind of the first century church. I mean, and what was really going on there, especially in that Asia Minor area. So
right.
Kudos to you guys for that. Praise the Lord that he's put that on your heart and sent you out there.
Well, and I'm really fortunate that we've had people who've come alongside and said this is important, and have supported us in prayer and in other ways. In 2020, when COVID hit, I think we had like 12 or maybe even 15 people who were pretty serious. They wanted to go, and we were even talking about setting up a little lecture series, trying to get our lectures into maybe the Where, What, When guide, put up posts, post-it notes, and placards, whatever, just letting people know of these conversations and little lectures that would happen at the camp. Now, obviously, it didn't happen because of COVID, but that's encouraging when people are coming alongside saying, "Hey, we want to be supportive in prayer, and hey, if we can come out and help, and yeah, we're going to vet you. We definitely want to talk to you and get to know you a bit. That's for sure." And then having Basil come around to the camp, and we've had some great conversations. I've been so thankful for Basil's friendship that way, and the fact that. And so I'm glad that you're taking the time to step into that world.
Yeah. No, it really has been fruitful in so many ways. This year was only my third year going, and have thankfully always been able to go in conjunction with Camp of the Unknown God. I don't camp with you guys, but I am orbiting you throughout the week. And, it started with a role of sort of helping get the word out about what you're doing, to encourage the body, to bring the reports. Not that you weren't doing that yourself, but in a different way, of course, with podcasting. And it really, as we were kind of discussing before the show, this year was very difficult. Was very difficult for a lot of reasons, and we will talk about this more thoroughly in another episode, exactly the sort of experience this year. But an extremely difficult year for me personally, and as I've sort of talked to more people, extremely difficult year for the whole population of Burning Man at the time. And for me personally, just like, I can echo and confirm the experiences you had. in sharing my stories, there, it's the internet. All my work's on the internet, so I have to deal with sort of the internet attitude about things. So I've got plenty of critics about even considering going, which I think is an unfortunate attitude. Again, the idea that the darkness of the place would snuff out the light brought into it is just silly and theologically inconsistent. But you know what? Everybody's everybody's figuring it out. But even this year for me, even in the almost methodical frequency of disasters and things not going the way I had planned them to go, each one of them introduced another opportunity to simply, even the presence of someone who is there on a mission from God with a Christian perspective and a loving countenance, simply interacting with people there, you could see having some sort of at least influence and at best transformative moment. Because again, a lot of these people are the types who consider Christians. I'm about to refer to a different episode we recorded today. But, the secular idea of Christians being do good things, go to heaven, do bad things, go to hell. And that being sort of the unfortunate summation of secular ideas about Christianity, which is simply erroneous and, depending on the intensity, straight up opposite of the gospel message. That it is not doing good or doing bad that determines your destiny, but it is the grace, the unbelievable grace of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, doing the transformation. A conversion event being another transformative event, and simply coming in contact with people, sharing the truth about just who I am, why I'm there, what my thoughts about what's going on, and the reasons for my attendance, truly had more, I can't speak for eternal benefit, but for me, had more sort of enduring benefit than simply going there to interview people or to make a podcast or something like that. I don't know. I'll just tell a quick story, and then I'll just because I want to hear Carl's kind of thoughts about it. Carl, at one point my generator broke down super early. I needed the generator. I have electronics. I'm trying to make a podcast. I need a generator. Broke down. Nobody could help me. Totally on my own, wandering the literal desert in search of a way to fix this generator. After hours of asking around, getting sent hither and yon, I was led to the DPW camp, the Department of Public Works. Now, in my experience, I'm curious for either confirmation or rebuke from you, Carl, but in my experience, for those who don't know, the Department of Public Works is kind of the volunteer organization. They're out there a month before the event. They're building things. They're running the city, basically. They are the workforce that makes the city happen, or at least the public works of the city. They're out there forever. They are hardened individuals. They are out there where we're there for a few days. They are there for months. Hardened individuals. Some might say that they might have an attitude about the attendees or something. They're living the life where others are just tourists type of thing. There's sort of a hardened, unfriendly vibe. Now, they try their best to not be that, but it's just what happens when you live the life that they live. And so I'm walking in, and the part of the city where the DPW camps and works out of is sort of affectionately called oh, what is it? What do they call it? Not the ghetto. They call it the what's the more formal name for like a ghetto? Oh
Slum.
no. I'm gonna I'm gonna need to get these words right when I do another piece. But it's basically affectionately called the ghetto. It is. There are no fancy lights, no music. It is row after row of basically storage container where these volunteers are living, and it's a very strange experience. And you're not really supposed to be there if you're not with the DPW. I mean, it's not illegal, but you're not necessarily welcomed with open arms. And I have to go to this one place in the DPW, not going to lie, pretty intimidated, pretty hot, not feeling good, getting weird looks from the DPW people. And I find the guy I'm supposed to find at the auto shop, the guy who just fixes all the water trucks and stuff. And I could not accurately paint a picture with my words to describe how intimidating this man was. This is not a man who wanted to be visited by anyone, much less some kid who did not come prepared to fix a generator out in the desert. Long story short, had a wonderful time, a delightful time, talking to him about why I was there, that I was a Christian, that I'm not there to send anybody to hell. And really, this fella put me through a transformational experience. And you could tell that there was some real paradigm shifts in just how to think about a wandering Christian person. He admitted he did not have a good experience with Christians in his life, grew up in a family that was Christian, had an extremely bad experience there, and told me afterwards that he was happy that God had led me to him. And it's little things like that in life, in regular life, if that happens, it's akin to some sort of miracle. But to have it happen in that place was truly a rewarding confirmation that, despite the difficulties, the Lord had plans when all my plans were complete disasters. So like any mission field, there's a degree where you go there for a purpose, but your purpose is just to get you in the door, and then the Lord takes over, and you just have to deal with it. So that's always a good lesson as well.
That is a good lesson. I've spent a little bit of time at the DPW, and yeah, they definitely portray themselves as a bunch of tough guys, tough characters,
Yeah.
and some of them are, sure, but I mean,
Yeah.
whatever. So what?
I will say they were not very happy to be put in a position. That's what took all day. They actually sent me places I didn't need to go. They were having fun with me. They took about 5 hours out of my day just sending me back and forth to different places.
I'm wondering, before we let you go, Carl, if you could just talk a little bit and kind of maybe close the show here, reflecting on the way that the event is closed out there, and it is called Burning Man for a reason. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the burning of the effigy out there, kind of the symbolism that's there, and then perhaps what that has come to mean to you, or if there's any kind of Christian sort of lesson to be gleaned there. But kind of, I guess, as the event out there would close, take us through what that looks like, and any sorts of revelations the Lord's given you in the midst of experiencing that year after year.
Well, one of the things that it has forced me to contemplate is the importance of art. And in Christian circles, I think sometimes we have downplayed its importance. Historically, we certainly have. And so I'm still wrestling with what that means, what that looks like. So for myself, and Basil, you made a really good point. Sometimes you yourself are changed. And for myself, that has been an area where I have, it has certainly impacted me, where I've been wrestling through what does that look like. Um, and it's not just simply there's other things as well.
But with the people who aren't familiar, you have it's a 100-foot tall wood
Right.
sculpture, a statue of a man.
Right. You have an effigy, and by the way, in terms of the art, I'm speaking about the art in general, not necessarily the effigy. But the effigy is very artistically done as well. Usually, 2019, it was amazingly artistically done. So you have an effigy, a figure of a man. He stands anywheres from back in the day, he was a small guy, but now he can stand as high as, I think 2014, he stood over 100 feet tall, but he's typically in that 60 to 70 foot range. And so he is the centerpiece of the city. The man is the centerpiece of the city. All streets, all the radial streets point back to him. And all week long, he is kind of the cornerstone. He's the monument that you all look towards. And then on Saturday night, the man burns, and it is a phenomenal fire. It is a party. You have fire spinners out there. You have hundreds of art cars, mutant vehicles, sound camps, built around the art cars. Everybody is out there. Tens of thousands of people surround this, and it is loud. It's a cacophony. It is lights. It is fire everywhere. And then the man burns. And after the man is done burning, when the fire subsides to a certain level and the fire marshals allow people to get near the fire, an interesting thing develops, and that is you see hundreds of people typically stripping down naked and walking in circles around the fire, and you have this big procession that just happens and goes on and on and on. So that's the vibe. And it's loud, it's exciting, it's a celebration. But there's another event, and it's the event that takes place on Sunday evening, because the centerpiece, really, the real centerpiece, isn't even the man. It's further out in the desert. It's the temple. And all week long, people have been going to the temple, have been writing notes, have been laying their grief out, have been placing wedding dresses out there, have been putting personal journals out there, have been depositing the ashes of their loved ones. In the beginning of the week, the temple is a blank slate. Nothing is on the walls. By the end of the week, the structure is mounded with more items than you could possibly count, with more notes than you could possibly count, of people pouring themselves out. And so all week long, that has been the emotional, spiritual, that's been ground zero. And so Sunday night, when the temple burns, the vibe is completely different. No fireworks, no sound cars, no lasers, no noise, no music. It's quiet. And everybody, tens of thousands of people, are quiet. And in silence, they watch it burn. And for them, it is a sense of catharsis, release, a longing, a hope that there's some type of wholeness, some type of healing, some type of maybe a renewal or an overcoming of something. And honestly, Chris, I think that's the heart of it. That really is what it's about. It is the hope that man still has, that there is some way forward, that there is some hope, that there is some healing. And I think that offers us as Christians that opportunity, and not just simply an opportunity in the sense that we're becoming opportunistic, but it's an opportunity for us to see the heart of humanity and to see at the soul level that indeed these are individuals, and they are longing, and they are desiring, and they're really desiring what only Jesus Christ can give them. And so that's important for us to keep in mind.
Well, thank you. That was powerful. That's exactly what I was looking for.
Well, Carl, thank you so much, my man. And remember, folks, Game of Gods. Go check it out. Where can people come in contact with your work some more, if they want to read the book or check out some of your essays, where would you like people to go?
You can go to gameofgods.ca. You can also find the book, of course, on Amazon. And you can read excerpts of it at gameofgods.ca. The other website you can go to is forcingchange.org. I used to run a monthly magazine called Forcing Change that examined these forces of transformation. And you can go and peruse through all 9 years of the back issues for free and download them all. So that's there as well.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Carl. Now, I know you and I were going to do some more talking in the next, week or couple weeks or whatever, where we can dig into some more specifics. But I'm really happy that you made some time to come give this, time to our listeners. And hopefully I believe that it brought some more understanding and some more perspective as to why Christians should care at all about Burning Man, and not just, discount it or even worse, ignore it or consider it some sort of lost cause for just begging for criticism. And folks, I highly recommend you go to gameofgods.ca and pick yourself up a copy of Game of Gods. It is a thick tome. It is rich with information, and not just about Burning Man, but about really, I have to say, it is one of the more comprehensive, collections of data, and analysis on how exactly our world changes, like as a whole. How can the change of global culture, global governance, global attitudes about things be guided, and how is it disseminated? How is it accepted and picked? It's just really an incredible work you've done, Carl. So go check it out, everybody. And Carl Teichrib, thank you so much again for coming on Ravel.
Thank you, folks, very much, guys. It was a real pleasure, and I'm just appreciate the opportunity to spend the time with you guys.
And there you go, folks. Thanks so much for tuning in to Ravel. Make sure you can remember, you can send your questions, your comments, anything. Just say hello to contact@ravelpodcast.com. Of course, I hope that there are some questions or comments spurred about this. This is an introduction to transformative events and Burning Man, but you can send those to contact@ravelpodcast.com. And don't forget to leave reviews, folks. Tell them that Carl Teichrib changed the way you thought about the world in just one small way, at least. You can do that on Apple Podcast. And other than that, thanks for listening to Ravel, and make sure to tune in next time. But before we go, Chris, do you have any last words?
Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to Ravel. To learn more about who we are, what we believe, or how to support this ministry, visit our website at ravelpodcast.com. If you have a question you would like answered on the show, or to let us know how we're doing, email us at contact@ravelpodcast.com. This project is made possible by the prayers and generosity of listeners just like you.